I served for 6 years in the parachute regiment on active service, as it were, in Northern Ireland, Macedonia, former Yugoslavia, and in Afghanistan. And in 2003 I joined the Special Air Service, and in 2005 I was deployed to Iraq. And Iraq changed everything for me. You might have heard it's all before, so I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. I was deployed into an American Special Forces unit. Our squadron was part of an American Special Forces unit. And in brief, our task was to smash our way into people's homes at night, ransack those homes and drag the men off, hand them over to be imprisoned and tortured by the Americans. Now you can read the history books and you can read the newspaper reports at the time. I'm sure they use different language and different terminology, but that's basically what we were up to. We were up to that pretty much every night of the week. And that came as a hammer blow to me in terms of what I thought being a soldier was about, what I thought the role of the British Army was, and what I thought I should be doing it. And I couldn't get past it. I couldn't sort of turn the other cheek and carry on with this task. And whilst I was home on leave, I asked for an interview with the CO and told him that I was refusing to continue serving in Iraq. As a result of that, I was released from army service and expected to leave quietly, and that would be the end of it. After I left the army, I experienced a very strange time. It sort of dragged on for a good 15 years, I imagine. A sort of disconnect between the experiences that I had and what I was told those experiences were, and what I was told had happened, and what the public perception of that war was. And I set about trying to get across my own perspective of what had happened in Iraq and what was continuing to happen and what was happening in Afghanistan at the time. I ended up meeting other veterans who also had different perspectives, and what interested me was that there's a sort of narrative that everything the British Army did up until 2003 was fine, and then we went to Iraq. And listening to Martin tonight, you can know that's not true. And over the years, I've met many veterans who had stories of what they'd done in Malaya. I don't know who's here tonight. A good friend of mine, Walter Heaton, served in Malaya in the late 40s and early 50s, and was involved in rounding up civilians and putting them into concentration camps as a thing that runs through all this. He was also involved in burying the dead after a massacre in a village called Batankali. I met another soldier who served in Cyprus, and people who served in Northern Ireland in the early years. And they all had similar stories and similar perspectives. And in 2011, after sort of 5-6 years in what people call the anti-war movement or the peace movement, whether that actually exists as a phenomenon or what that is, who knows, but we set about forming an organisation in the United Kingdom, Veterans for Peace UK, and we were active from 2011 really until 2019 and the start of the pandemic, and sort of dragged on through the pandemic, but we actually shut down earlier this year. Now, from my own perspective, I can say that I started out as an anti-war campaigner, anti the war in Iraq, and over time that broadened to being more generally anti-war, and years of campaigning in different ways with Darren and others in the room, two people who campaigned with, involved in anti-militarism, anti-recruitment, anti-war activity, anti-war protests, campaigning against war. But there's something sort of missing from that endeavour, and that is that this question behind it all, that, you know, like we can be against all this, we can be anti-war, anti-militarist, and you know, we can be non-violent, but it kind of leaves it open to, well, what's the alternative, or what is there? And opened up this question in me, and it continues in me, and that is, what is peace? You know, we've got this banner here, peace, and we throw this word around, peace. But what is it? Does it exist? Is it something that exists? You know, what is this? What is this phenomenon, or what is this word? And I've been sort of like engaged in this for several years now. There's actually a good friend of mine in the audience tonight, Rod Tweedy. He and I meet up on an almost weekly basis, and this is constantly the sort of subject of our discussions and conversations and dialogue. And we probably we've met for the last year, almost 3 hours a week, and we're still no closer to working out or getting any closer to what this is. Peace seems to evade definition. We have these fleeting glimpses. I don't know about you, I have these fleeting glimpses of peace. And then in trying to define or explain what that is, you're kind of left with an empty hand, and left grabbing something that dead or false. It evades our definitions, explanations. But there's something there. There's something underneath all of this. And so, in trying to understand what peace is, I found it easier or convenient maybe to identify what it is that denies us that peace, what it is that distorts our view, what it is that prevents us from realising this. And I've had plenty of experience of that, you know, the sort of turmoil of war and the turmoil of campaigning gives you an insight into what leads you away from this, what is a denial of peace. And there are many. Our society, our traditions, our culture, it seems to me to be one of continuously turning our back on peace, moving away from peace, distracting ourselves from it. There are many aspects to this, and you know, too many to mention here, but one that comes to mind that Martin touched on in talking about Northern Ireland and Bosnia, but also within our society. We often point towards Iraq, point towards Ukraine, point towards Northern Ireland, point to all these conflict zones and pretend that everything's good here, everything's peaceful here, and there's the problem over there. But it's my assertion that our very attitudes and desires, demands, conditions that we place on life are responsible for these broader conflicts that we see. You know, we're not these innocent bystanders. And one of these that we can look at is identity. You know, people often talk about peace and think that you can hold these two things together. That you can hold an identity and be peaceful, or an identity and live in peace, or have some sort of relationship in that. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think it's possible to hold an identity. I'm Catholic, I'm Protestant, I'm English, I'm Welsh, you know, whatever identity you want, and you know, the main thing we talk about in today's society. I don't think those things are possible, but we're wedded to identity. We hold this tightly. Maybe we can look into that. And identity is tied into status. You know, a lot of what we see in the build-up to war and the continuation of war is, you know, people talk about the arms industry and power and money, but status is a key player in all this, in our denial of peace, in our sort of rush to war. You know, Tony Blair wouldn't have done what he did if there wasn't his need and demand for status. But for us to point the finger at Blair and pretend that he was the only person who was gaining some sort of status from that war in Iraq would be a denial. You know, all of us, the soldiers in the room who went to Iraq, went to Afghanistan, we all hoped in some way to maintain, improve our status amongst our peers, amongst our family, amongst our friends through that endeavour. So status is something that we need to observe and dig into if we're serious about peace, because the two are incompatible. And the last thing I'm going to bring up, and there are so many, you know, like chapter brought up was a more comprehensive list of these things, but it's our need to control. Our need to control as a denial of peace and as a key driver of conflict and war. And I'm not looking at peace just as the opposite of war, but you know, like we're sort of in that realm of the speakers we have here tonight. But this need to control, and this need to control that we see in ourselves, that I saw in the army, that we see in our politics, that we see in pretty much everything we do. Every aspect of our life is about control. Is not missing from the peace movement. Is not missing from the anti-war movement. And you know, if we're serious about peace, we need to look in those of us who campaign against war, campaign on, you know, for peace. We need to be honest about this and need to look at our own methods, our own actions, our own desires and wants, our own motivations. Because much of what I've seen in the last 15 years since leaving the army is okay, maybe motivated differently, or you know, with different language using, but that base urge to control, to take control of situations, to take control of the actions of others, to resist the control of others, is a key driver in conflict, a key driver and a denial and a movement away from peace. So I think we're going to hand over to Darren there. And,
well, thank you there. I think we're going to. Do we have any questions?
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, from the audience to start with. Has anyone got yes?
I think someone has a roving mic there, so now we go.
It's really interesting what you're saying there about how us clinging to an identity is a barrier to peace. What can we do to kind of get over that, in your opinion? Or if you're just raising the question, well, what would you do if you don't want to tell anyone else how to do it?
I think that's a key thing you raised there, is that too often we're looking for others to give us the answers to all these questions. I'm not sitting here claiming to know any of these answers or wanting or wishing to tell you, you know, I'll direct you in this. But identity is something that myself, you know, in observation, have seen in my own life. And I don't think there's any difference between conflict at an individual level and conflict at a global level. You know, the same drivers are there. So, and in my own life, that this identity and status are entwined. We hold on to identity because we believe that it gives us some status amongst others. And so if you can identify status as a driver of conflict, the need for status, is entwined to keep using the word, the need to dominate others. Then it becomes easier to observe in yourself when you're holding on to these different identities and what you're using them for.
This is more of a comment, just on that theme of identity, and also on the theme of the Yugoslav wars, because identity in the context of those countries was such a big part of what allowed propaganda to push people to commit such atrocities on their neighbours and their family members. But at the same time, that identity also allowed those countries to preserve tradition under many centuries of different occupiers. So I completely agree that I think identity is one of the big drivers of war, but it does confuse me how to, do we just let go of tradition, or how do you maintain that tradition but consider yourself as a world citizen?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because a lot of things that, I think this comes down to that we talk about like resisting occupation often involves violence. You know, if we're pro-peace and we're against violence, so these things become very complicated very quickly. But yeah, so I think in general it's when we have is it about when we have certain identities dominating is I think that's the core of it, right? When it's about smashing other people's identities with your own or something like that.
If I could just add that the sense of national identity can be a driving force in war. I'll take you back to the Bosnian War, 92 to 95. What happened is Yugoslavia collapsed. Nationalism was resurgent. They're flying with certain flags, singing certain songs, was banned in Tito's time. People kept the flags in their attics. And in no time at all, in Herzegovina, the hardline clerks were driving around with pictures of Ante Pavlovich on the back windows of their car. He was the leader of the fascist government, Ustasha, during the Second World War. People are driven often also by panic, by fear. You don't know what actually happens when war breaks out. The rumour mill really starts because usually there's not enough electricity for television, the radio signal is weak, and people then respond to rumour. And the Croat priests were warning their peoples of the dreadful massacres that were about to be committed, and so they sort of got their retaliation in first. So practically, a sense of national identity is a driving force in war.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for both of you. What I'm going to ask relates to a conversation I had, a few, but this one was a very long one, with Bruce. He visited me about 3 years before he died for breakfast. It was a very long breakfast. And he wanted me to explain why I had started a movement called KUFUD, which stands for Humanity United for Universal Demilitarization. In reality, it's not demilitarization because that means reducing the military. It's really for the abolition of militarism. Because I said to him, what do you want politicians to do with weapons? Why do we make them and why do we sell them, export them all over the world? What else can you do? You cannot sell grenades or landmines in a supermarket for people to play with. The only use, and I really feel that the more I go, and I lived 7 years in Geneva, in close contact with the United Nations, and I spoke with so many diplomats there and politicians, and they all agree, while we have armed forces, there will never be peace in the world. Because politicians themselves, they don't go and fight. When they decide to have a war, even though nobody likes wars, because I travel, I'm by profession a musician, and travel to many, many countries, all continents. I ask everywhere, do you like wars? Did you like the war you had? No, I never had one person saying yes. I never saw someone begging government to keep us at war. But they managed to impose wars upon us, whether we like them or not, because there is nothing else that can be done. Of course, they justify the employment, the money they make, also the thousands of people who are employed in military factories. So it is really a business where you have workers in one country making these killing toys to kill other workers in another part of the world. It's just a game, and unless I think we get rid of this, there will never be peace in the world.
Yeah, I think this comes to the core of the problem is that the arms trade is a solution looking for a problem constantly, and the solution is always bombing and naming, and it will, as long as we have our economies dependent on the arms trade, then we're going to keep on using these things and causing more conflicts.
Darren, can I ask one that's come on the chat?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
The two of you, that's Martin and Ken, represent different generations and different wars. How would you characterise the relationship between the UK and the US in relation to these wars? And that's from Veterans of Peace USA, Cindy Piper.
I would say that it is extremely close. The UK depended on the USA for intelligence in the Falklands War, and without that, we probably have lost. I know so many veterans of that war. We used 250 British soldiers died. I know so many veterans who told me what a transparent thing it was. But our politicians are very reluctant to fall out of step with the Americans, and I speak here from having been the BBC's Washington correspondent for 10 years. They cherish the illusion or the reality, whatever it is, of the special relationship. And you said in recent times, it was said that with the death of the Queen, she knew, or she coincided, can we say, with 15 prime ministers and 13 American presidents. And only one of those presidents never came to Buckingham Palace. And that was Lyndon B. Johnson, because we stayed away from Vietnam. Just for once we said no. He stayed away from the palace. So it's that close. But I think the credit for our staying away from Vietnam must belong, I think, to Dennis Healy. And he was also a veteran. He'd been on the Anzio beaches. He knew the reality of war. Tony Blair never did. And I think that the best witnesses of peace are those who have lived through the alternative.
Oh, sorry, I'll tell you what.
Can I ask a personal question? Something that troubles me as well. Do you still have some pride in being two crack regiments during your service? And do you reconcile that pride and that conflict with your
I don't think your mic's on, so if you flip the switch to green. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, it's a personal one for Ben. So I'm a veterans piece as well. Do you still have some pride in your military career and the regiments you were a member of? And does that conflict with your desire for peace? I mean, that pride itself, you're mentioning as part of the sort of domination and the continuation of this stuff. Pardon me if it's too personal.
No, it's not something I really think about, and I can say that I don't really feel anything about my military service anymore. I don't feel anything about it. I can look at it occasionally, and my memory is getting worse and worse. I don't even rely, I can't rely on my own memory to remember things in the right order anymore. But no, I don't feel any pride, but I don't feel anything about that service. It's not, it's gone.
Hi, I'm just trying to go back to what you were saying about the identity, about war, and I play the devil's advocate and say it's more of a class thing. As in, when you say identity, Saudi Arabia and Israel is very different identity, and they have made ties recently. I believe that the people that suffer from wars are the lower class, and never really the upper class or the super rich. So I think focusing on identity and being like, oh, you're from a different country than me, or you're from a different religion, and that, I think that could be a trip up for a way to peace.
Yeah, sure.
What do you say about that?
What do I say about that? I did say that I just pretty much randomly picked out 3 things that are impediments, distractions from peace, identity being one of them. This idea of class is a denial of peace. This idea of identity is a denial of peace. You're wanting to split things up into this class, that class, and every other class, and then pit them against each other. Is a denial of peace. You can't hold on to these things. This is why peace is so difficult for us, because it's conditional for most of us. It's conditional. So when you go on those marches and people are shouting, no justice, no peace, you can't have both. You can't have both. Get that out of your head. Choose one. And if you choose justice, fine, carry on. But you have no interest in peace. If you choose class, carry on, no interest in peace. Choose identity, no interest in peace. Choose status, choose power, choose wealth. I could carry on with a long list of distractions and desires that we all have that prevent us. While you hold those things, you will get no closer.